First of all, I want to say welcome to all of you. For me, this is really a terrific day. As most of you know, because most of you were there, today at noon, Mayor Carl Dean opened what is going to be a 9-month celebration. It's a celebration of a time, a moment in this city's history that was seminal. If you look back 50 years ago today, this day, the 28th of June, half a century ago, the people of our community across an invisible line that separated the city from the county, they came together in separate elections because the law required separate votes by the city and by the county. They came together, and across that invisible line, they embraced a new form of self-governance, metropolitan government called Metro. And the mayor asked George Cate, the first vice mayor of Metropolitan Nashville, Thelma Harper, our distinguished state senator, and me to co-chair this 9-month celebration. And today was the kickoff, and every month here in this room, we're going to re-celebrate various aspects of what it took to make this last 50 years the positive, progressive 5 decades that it's been. I'd like to open tonight by asking Mayor Dean to say just a word of welcome to us. Carl, thank you.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you to Thelma and George for co-chairing this committee. You've did an outstanding job today, and I'm really looking forward to the months ahead as we get more and more into the reviewing what has happened in Nashville 50 years ago and the years since. First, let me give you the good news. The good news is that I'm going to give a shorter remarks than I even gave today, not even to mention the State of Metro address. The 50th anniversary of Metro is a big deal in my mind. As mayor, one of the most frequent questions I get asked when I attend mayor's conferences or I go anywhere else is, how did it happen in Nashville? What are the benefits of it, and how can we do it? And particularly, even in the last couple of years, with the national recession, the international recession, folks have really started to think, why are we duplicating efforts every 10 miles? You know, I was up in Ohio. I was asked to speak on how it happened in Nashville and what the benefits are. And it's clear to really anybody that we did something special here 50 years ago. And the idea of spending some months talking about it and spending some time actually educating the public on the significance of this. I mean, there are many people in this room who remember those events well, but there are lots of people who have moved to Nashville in the last 10 or 20 years who really don't know why it happened or what it means. And there are also young people who have no idea that they live in really a special city with a special form of government. And so the public education piece of this is real important to me. And I'm really proud that we have Ronnie Stein from the council here. Ronnie, thank you for being with us. And Tori Johnson, our great district attorney. Chief Anderson, who's done a fantastic job as police chief. And Ed Kendall from the school board. My good friend Ed Kendall is here too. So I certainly appreciate the Metro support for this. And I want to again say thanks to George, Thelma, and John for all your hard work. You know, the pay has got to make it worthwhile to you, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Mayor. I mean, the audience appreciates everything you said, particularly the brevity with which you said it. And I'm going to try to be reasonably brief myself, which is totally out of character. You know, old men, and I am going to be 85 next month. Old men think slow, and Southern boys talk slow, but I'm going to do the best I can to get through this. I think tonight we're going to have a wonderful panel discussion. Francis Guest is going to moderate, and there are going to be two distinguished panelists that join me here. One is going to be my co-chair, George Cate, and the other is Charles Warfield. George was our first vice mayor, the first vice mayor of Metro. Charlie Warfield was a member of the Charter Commission that designed this unique and progressive form of government that has survived these 50 years and made us, in many cases, the envy of other cities. Many cities have tried to duplicate it, but the conflict in politics has so often sunk it. Where it succeeded, it has succeeded because Nashville has been adopted as the model. I mentioned that Charles Warfield was a member of this Charter Commission that devised this unique form of government. I'd just like to briefly recognize, again, Torrey Johnson. Torrey Johnson is our district attorney, and throughout his tenure has provided that office a picture of integrity. But his father, Vic Johnson, was with Charlie, a member of that commission, influential member of that commission, as was Cecil Branstetter. And Dewey and Kay Branstetter are there, along with Julie, Cecil's daughter-in-law, and Hunter, his grandson. And I'd like to ask all of you to join me in thanking them for what their parents did a long time ago to make this wonderful place. And then I'd like to recognize Ronnie Stein, a member of the Metro Council, as the mayor said, a former vice mayor of this city. Ed Kendall, who's here, as the mayor said, member of the school board. There's so many other people here that are representative of one form of service to this metropolitan government and another. And hopefully during the course of the evening, we'll talk about their roles, and you get to take a look at them. To begin with, I'd like to say take just a moment to ask you to review with me the weeks before this moment 50 years ago. Now it's now 20 after 7, and there are 40 minutes 50 years ago before the polls closed. And I can tell you, in the offices of the Nashville Tennessean, we supported it, and in the offices of the Nashville Banner, they opposed it. There was great tension. In the weeks leading up to this day, 50 years ago, there was a very tough political campaign underway. In this community, representatives of the two separate governments, the city government, the county government, I mean, there was great opposition in the corporate sector, in organized labor, in the practice of law, in law enforcement, Chief Anderson. In almost every sector, even in the churches, there were strong disagreements about whether we would or would not have two governments merged into one. I guess, as I look back on as the editor of the Tennessean then, as I look back on it, if that conflict was epitomized anywhere, it was between those two competing newspapers, the Nashville Banner in the afternoon, owned by Jimmy Stallman, and the Tennessean in the morning, owned by Eamon Evans and his mother, Lucille. And so to help you understand, to help us all revisit that moment, I want to ask you to take a little trip with me in your own mind's eye, using this screen. That's our logo. Thank Tam Gordon for making it possible for us to have a logo and for making it available tonight. But I want to ask you to watch the screen with me. I'm going to take you back. We had, at that time in this city, two of the most talented, gifted graphic artists, political cartoonists in the country. In the afternoon, Jack Knox was the Banner's cartoonist. In the morning, Tom Little, Pulitzer Prize winner, was the Tennessean's cartoonist. You know, they had great respect for each other. Once you said that, you've said it all. I mean, and each of them had, you know, I once had an uncle who played the fiddle, and my mother said he had artistic temperament. Tom and Jack both had artistic temperament. They expected their editors every day to tell them how great they were. And as Tom Little's editor, I told him, and Charlie Moss was the editor of the Banner, and he told Jack. Well, let me just ask you to go back for a moment. First of all, this sort of sets the scene, I think. Let you know that it was not all one way. Russia has one government. Castro has Metro. This was a scene of some of those people who opposed Metro. Castro has Metro. They wore it on the backs of their cars. I haven't checked to find out whose license number that was. Even the aged and the very young were asked to join hands against Metro. But there was another side. There were people who were for it. The difficult time that Jack Knox had, as you'll see as we go forward, the Banner in 1958, during the first election for Metro, we had a charter, Charlie, and we had an election, and the law required city voters must support it, county voters must support it. 1958, the city voters supported it, the county voted against it. Mayor Ben West was strongly in favor of it. This is a Tom Little cartoon. If you lived in the county, the odds were very strong that if you wanted police and fire protection, you paid a private police or private fire department. And you can see Tom Little is sort of depicting that. Also in 1958, and this is from Jack Knox, Jack is in favor of Metro at this point. Here he's got the greater Nashville voter with a foot in each boat, one the city boat, the other one in the county boat, and that shining vessel in the distance there is one government, and Jack, it's almost a self-portrait of Jack, pushing himself out to become part of one government, and that was 1958. Jack then, in 1962, the election comes up again. Charlie and his colleagues go, Cecil and Vic Johnson, they all come together, and so we're going with slightly altered version. Jack is still using the boat as a metaphor for the election, but now he's reversed himself, as the Banner has. Nothing to worry about. Those little old cracks will close up some when you get out in the middle, maybe. Well, the last time we saw him, he was in the boat, in the middle, headed toward that very boat, Metro. Tom Little, on the other hand, Mayor West was for it big in 1958. He was a visionary. Mayor West decided the voters went against this. I tried my best to deliver the city vote for it, but it failed. And so I've got to move this city. The law required, the law permitted cities size of Nashville, the mayor and the city council could arbitrarily annex property. And Mayor West said the city's got to grow, and he annexes some 40-odd square miles of property, and he takes into the city people who had voted in that previous election against going into the city. And so Tom Little takes Mayor West, and Ben West in 58, I'm for one government. I'm against one government, Ben West, now, 1962. So I'm just going to briefly touch on these. Jack uses a balloon as a metaphor quite frequently. A pie in the sky, but what's on the plate? It's an empty plate he has there. Little is still working on Ben West's annexation program. He makes him a land grabber. And quite often they use a home or a house or a residence as a metaphor to make the case. Jack Knox puts up a very nice front door to a shack. Metro one government bargain, charter limitations, doubtful constitutionality, a very attractive front, he says, and Little answers, city county county taxes under the same house, makes the same point. And here you are. We talked a moment ago, you saw this. Now, under one government, there are people who have been brought into the city but haven't been able to, not been able to get all the services. And some of them who are now annexed into Nashville are still wondering whether they ought to buy this private fire and police protection that was offered, say, in Madison, Inglewood, Belmead, and elsewhere in the county. Tom Little, the mayor, Mayor West, realizes, if I'm going to expand this city, I've got to find a way to provide services, which means I have to find money to provide services. And so I saw David Ewing a little earlier tonight, and I hope you'll ask him to show you $10 city auto tax. Everybody who drove a car in Davidson County for 30 days a year had to pay the city $10. It was a green sticker. Tom Little, as you saw, attacked it right here. Public indignation over being taxed. It was really a user tax, but coming when it did, as it did, and some people went to jail for a day because they didn't buy it. So Little sort of makes a point of the $10 green sticker tax. In other cartoons, he talks about 10 for Ben, only again, needling Mayor West. This is by Jack Knox. The bridge to Metro is too shaky to go on. It has doubtful constitutionality. Little, once more, stays after the mayor. Political emergency jobs, City Beautiful. These are promises from annexation. And Little says, with tongue-in-cheek, this is progress. I'll get back to you a little later, says Mayor West, according to Tom Little. And here we have city government as annexed, offering wonderful apples, and a warning, don't dig up that apple tree, says Jack Knox. Little then says, you've taken in these schools, but you're not providing funds for them, and this is the leaning tower of annexation. Jack always utilizing animals. It was a frequent a device of his. He has the chicken plucked, grand promises, ifs, maybes, false claims. That's what Metro promises, says Jack. Tom comes back, Ben West's annexation plans. Tom pretty much stayed on Mayor West as his metaphor. Jack, from time to time, moved from one animal to another. Here he has the snake scaring the chickens, the Metro snake. The more we see of it, the more frightening it is. Tom comes back again, hitting Ben without characterizing him, but Ben West politics drives a wedge between the city and the county. Jack says Metro's not worth the gamble. Shoot, you're faded. One government, IOUs. And on the other hand, he says growing Nashville, expanding city services, urban movements. That's the way it's really going. And he says, shoot, you're faded. Tom, on the other hand, says annexation is squeezing the life out of the suburbs. Jack says the Metro lake is really a puddle. And don't dive in there. Metro promises too shallow. There comes a time when the police chief begins to say, people had better not come across lines and vote illegally. We're going to have police power at the polls, and Little takes advantage of that and calls it a bitter threat. Jack, meanwhile, goes back to the balloon and the air castle, and it's full of holes, and it's collapsing. And you can see he has factional politics down there below, trying to pump air into that fading air castle. Now we're getting close to the election, and Little wants to know if you've registered. Knox, on the other hand, warns if you step into that booth, there may not be a floor to it. And there's a pitfall that'll take you right down to Metro, right down to hell. And careful where you stand in that voting booth. Little, on the other hand, decides, well, we're going to take the high road. He's beginning to feel a little confident, you know. He has the annexation of the tax to remind you of what he's been saying about the mayor. And then he says, for one government, progress, efficiency, economy, the future. Now, this is an Election Day cartoon by Jack Knox. I mean, when this edition of the Banner comes out in the morning and throughout the day, this is Election Day. Don't vote yourself a nightmare. And there is the clock that says polls close at 7 o'clock tonight. So this dispute between these two went on throughout this campaign from mid-May until literally the final hour of the election. Mayor West lost. Beverly Brierly, the county judge of Davidson County, was elected. They were friends. They both had gone to Central High School. It's not easy to be a graceful winner. It's even tougher to be a graceful loser. The two of them were graceful. And you know, I think it says something about both of them that members of their family of another generation went on to serve in politics and government, and I think it speaks well of the two of them. That brings me to the conclusion of this war, this cartoonist war that went on. Now I'm going to ask my colleague George Cate, our former vice mayor, to come up and have a seat. We're going to be mic'd. Charles Warfield is going to sit there. Francis Guest is going to be our moderator, and he's going to sit right here, and I'm going to sit in the middle. We're going to have a roundtable discussion to try to put into some context what these cartoons have pantomimed. And after Francis leads us in a discussion, we then will have questions from the audience. Thank you all very much.
Our process is going to be fairly simple tonight. What we're going to do is we're going to have some presentations from our panel members, and then we're going to allow the members of the audience through some handheld microphones that we have available to either ask questions or make your observations. At the time the '62 election occurred, I was here in Nashville. I was 16 years old. I had just gotten my driver's license. I was thinking about being mayor of Nashville, and then, Mr. Warfield, you gave my city away.
Right.
Why did you do that, and how did you do it?
Well, I was honored to be a part of that original charter group, and I learned more than anything else I've ever had to do. And I had friends I'd gone to law school with, like your daddy, Cecil Branstetter, and it was a wonderful time. We sat down with Cormac Cochran, who was our chairman. He ran a good ship, a tight ship, as we would say in the Navy, John. He let everybody speak their mind, but he kept order all the time, and we moved along. And it was time for us to move along, and oh, how Nashville has moved along.
Mr. Siegenthaler, you were at the newspaper. It has been suggested that Silman Evans, who was the publisher of the paper in '61, during the ramp up for the campaign, had an unfortunate accident, I believe at Old Hickory Lake, and then his mother, brother came in to take over the paper. They brought you to the paper. But that he was the architect of the revisiting.
Well, I think he played a role. I think Silman Evans Jr. played a major role, Francis. I think that's right on the money. After the failure in 1958 to pass it. Tennessean had been for it then. I think there was a great disappointment on Solomon Jr.'s part, and I think that he did everything he could do to keep the idea and the ideal alive. And I think at the same time, he saw that Mayor West's vision had changed, and that if the ideal was going to be kept alive, the newspaper had to take the lead in trying to do that. So I think that's accurate.
In looking at your discussions leading up to presenting the charter to the people of Nashville, Charlie, what were the Charter Commission's biggest concerns?
The biggest concerns that we had worked around subjects like how was the school board going to be determined? Was it going to be an appointed school board, which many people wanted to have, or was it going to be an elected school board? And in preparation for the vote, we had many, many meetings at different parts of the community. And that was one of the big things. The other big thing, Francis, was that there had been talk of having a small council because it was, quote, more efficient. Well, councils aren't supposed to be efficient. They are a deliberative body, so they're not supposed to be. Everybody said, I want to know the councilman. I want to tell him to fix that pothole right in front of my house. Every kind of meeting that we had, that was the thing that everybody was telling us. So they were two big issues.
Mayor Kate, what do you remember from then that we need to know?
You know, I think it's interesting to run back the clock just a little bit. I remember going into Cheatham County following my dad's coonhounds while I was a student at Vanderbilt in the 1940s. And we hear all kinds of noise down around the Cumberland River. I said, what is all that construction? My dad says they are digging on the bottom of the Cumberland River to bring natural gas from Texas and Louisiana to Nashville. And now that was an important thing that was taking place. While I was at Vanderbilt for 2 summers, I worked for the Nashville Electric Service. And I put up some of the steel that is in some of the centers today. And so what was happening is in the late 40s, there was growth, there were utilities being provided. You know, in the 1940s, the population of Davidson County increased, and let me see if my figure is correct. It says it increased by 64% during the 1940s. Now, when the population is growing that rapidly in a community, the need for good local government is very important. Now, that changed some in the 1950s. In the 1950s, the county population grew by 24%, but the city population decreased by 2%. So what we don't realize is changes in population made a tremendous need for services and for good, efficient local government.
I wonder, if I could just
go right ahead.
I just wonder how much white flight.
Yes.
Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Education, comes down 1954.
True.
In the 50s, it goes down in the city, and my recollection about it is that there was a great deal of white flight, that people deserted the cities really to get away from the issue of integration. We were still a very race-oriented society in Nashville then.
Speaking of natural gas, I'm reminded that it was one of the motivators, I believe, that prompted Aladdin to move to Nashville, and with their relocation here, Victor Johnson upset the order of things by not having Negro jobs and white jobs. He just had jobs, and in so doing became a very influential impact on the African-American community at that point in time. He also served as chairman of the Meharry Board of Trust. Charlie, from your recollection, to what extent do you think Victor Johnson played in bringing all this together?
Victor,
in all due respect to her.
Victor was a mature intellectual who had a great public interest. And he had the ability to persuade people by reason. He was good at that. He persuaded you by reason. And Victor had a great deal to do with it coming back the second time. And he continued to believe that we could get it passed. And I would say he was one of the most influential people in bringing it back the second time.
Mayor, it has also been recently said that today Nashville is a great city. And the adjunct question to that is it a great city because of Metro or in spite of Metro? Which would you, after being present at the beginning, determine today?
I think Nashville had to grow. It simply had to grow. The question would be, would it grow by a plan of annexation, or would we develop a new structure, a combination, putting together needs of city and county with one mayor and one council, one planning commission, groups to plan for the future of the entire community and not just looking at it separately and individually.
You know, Mr. Siegenthaler, it has been also suggested that after the '58 election, it was pretty much concluded that we're done with this. And we came back with the '62 election. If it had failed in '62, do you think we would have had Metro government?
Never. I think we never would have had it. And I think Mayor West, whom we opposed, I think Mayor West, I said he was a visionary. He really worked hard for it in 1958. He busted it. And when it failed, I think he never thought it would come back. I think he didn't understand the determination and the vision of Cecil Branstadter, Vic Johnson, Charlie Warfield, to be compatible with the idea of bringing it back. And he went his own way, and he annexed knowing that it was never going to come back. That's his own mind. It's never coming back, and I've got to help this city grow. And so he had that law that let him annex. Now, if you're out living in that area that gets annexed, you don't have all the services. Then you get hit with a $10 green sticker tax, and you still don't have the services. And if you're in that annexed area, you're upset about it. And if you're in that area beyond the annexed area, you're saying, they're coming after me next. And then, of course, the $10 sticker tax, if you drive into the city, you get hit with that tax without being provided any services. So I think that it was dead in the water in 1958, and if it hadn't been for people like Charlie and Cecil and Vic, I don't think it ever would have come back. And I would just add the name of one other charter commission whose influence was notable, and that's C. Alexander Luby.
Wonderful.
Mr. Luby's support. You'd know better than I, Charlie.
Well, he and I was sort of a subcommittee with reference to establishing the councilmanic districts. And one thing that we wanted to be sure to do, because it was right and because it was also political, was to be sure that we set up councilmanic districts that were fair in terms of the African American group to be able to become a part of that government. And Ferris Deep was then out at the Planning and Zoning Commission, and he wanted to do it one way, and he was such a good public servant, a really good public servant. We told him, Dr. Luby and I told him, we want to be absolutely sure that as we draw these councilmanic lines, that we are fair to all members of the community, including the African American community, and that's true.
What was the reaction to the point of view that was expressed by Attorney Bob Lillard, who was not afforded a seat at that table, but had a obvious constituency within the black community?
Oh, he was a very fine person. I had done a lot of things with Bob over the years, and he had a great deal of persuasive ability in the community, and I'm not sure exactly where you want me to go with this.
where you went. Mr. Siegenthaler, would Metro pass today?
I don't think it would pass today. You know, it's difficult to, it's a difficult question. But look at where it's failed elsewhere. I mean, A.C. Wharton, mayor of Memphis now, really wants it and can't get it. Memphis is a good analogy. I think the separation of city and county governments, each with their own constituency, each with their own political constituency, each of those politicians, and I don't use that term as a pejorative, that word is a pejorative, because politicians are honorable men, believe it they are, and both Beverly and Ben West were.
Yes.
But I do think, Francis, that it would have been virtually impossible if it had failed the second time ever to bring it up again. And you know, you had 47 city councilmen. They were really called magistrates, and they were out in the county. And then you had 21 plus 6 after annexation, 27 in the city. These people were going to have to run against each other. I think one of the reasons the council had was 40 members was to diffuse some of that competition between magistrate and magistrate who would have to run against each other, and councilman and councilman. And I just think, you know, political reality just doesn't lend itself to voting a government in that takes your job away.
I think today, if I may chat on that a minute, I think today the community is right well sold on metropolitan government. And I think that if we had to, for some reason, vote today, I would be of the opinion that they would vote for Metro rather than going back to a 2-city-county government situation.
Could I just add one other word about Mr. Luby? Mr. Luby understood that metropolitan government was going to substantially dilute the African-American vote. Bob Lillard understood it too.
Yeah.
Still, before the councilmanic election takes place, Bob Lillard comes over. He fought it, but once it was endorsed, he then endorsed it and ran and was elected to city council as being someone who said, people have decided, I go for this. But both of them understood that
Can you see
that the black vote was going to be diluted.
Yeah.
Excuse
Yeah.
me, George.
No.
It's true.
What do you think about that, Mayor?
You know, I want to give some credit also to what was happening just prior to Metro. Why did it come here? Where was the leadership? Where was the momentum that brought it in? In 1951 and 52, there was a commission of business and professional people and educators with both races involved that met and proposed that there be a change in local government. Now, at that time, what they recommended was, let's enlarge the city of Nashville by annexation, because consolidation wasn't legal yet. Not until 1953, when the city had the option under an amendment to the Tennessee Constitution to consolidate city and county. Then it took place. You know, I was away from Nashville for 2 years, from 1952 to 54, serving a little time with Uncle Sam. When I came back in 1954 and went to meetings of the YMCA, PTAs, wherever I went, what was everybody talking about? Talking about the possibility of consolidating city and county governments, because in the intervening period of time, the Tennessee Constitution had been amended, and now it was possible. So the initial thrust to move in that direction started right here in Nashville.
But then the question becomes, to what extent were there other forces that were acting on that? To what extent do you consider the social order of things? To what extent are you looking at Nashville being ground zero for the civil rights movement, it having all these outside agitators, and what can we do to put these people back in their place and keep them in order?
You know, that was a serious question. Where was the power going to be? Would there be a day when we'd have a African-American mayor? would we have a majority in the council, or at least would we have good representation on the council on the at-large positions from within the African American community? Those were issues that had to be gradually resolved, and it took some time. Metro didn't solve those immediately. For some time, the 5 at-large members were white. They were white. But gradually, in recent years, that has changed. Fortunately, both in terms of the at-large and also in terms of the vice mayor.
Do you think if Nashville had not consolidated, that the power at the subsequent point in time could have prevented the destruction of North Nashville through the construction of the interstate?
I wish I had enough wisdom to be able to answer that question and feel confident that I was giving a good answer. Nobody knows for sure. But the thing that was very important was, as people like Charlie Warfield worked on the Charter Commission, let's make it a fair approach so that all citizens benefit in the long run from the structure and from the leadership that will come as a result of that. We were blessed by some good leaders. Hey, it was my privilege serving as first vice mayor to have both Alexander Luby and Bob Lillard on that council, including people like John Driver and Mansfield Douglas and Harold Love. We had some very fine leadership from within the black community, and that was a significant factor in how things developed once metropolitan government was underway.
During the past 50 years, do you think, based on that perspective, Metro has been capable of attracting that same caliber of membership to the council?
You know, I have mixed reaction there. I served 6 years on the Board of Education, appointed by my former classmate at East Nashville High School, Dick Fulton, who was then mayor. He appointed me in the bicentennial year, 1976. He called me into his office for a conference. Flags were flying, bands were playing. He said, George, I got a job for you and you need to do it. I want you on the Board of Education. That was not an easy time because we were operating under the auspices and direction of a federal court that was trying to tell us what we had to do in order to be fair insofar as the student body, the faculties, the services provided by education. It was an interesting time now, but we fortunately had some good, strong leadership, both from within the white community and the business community there, and from within the, as we then called it, the black community, the African American community. There were some real leaders, and it was a mutual thing that has made us progress, I think. Well,
one of the reasons they wanted me to be moderator is because they knew that the members of the audience could supplement what I was trying to do. And so at this point, we're going to open it up and see if we can have those who have gathered with us supplement, add to, share in this process. Ronnie, you recognized.
You got a mic on the way. Patrick McGinn's going to bring you the mic.
Yes, my name is Ronnie Greer. I am a former councilman for the 17th District, native of the city of Nashville, and I was 12 years old when this new government kicked in. My question is this. In the 50 years of the Metro government, the role of the council at large for that body has been confusing. I've had folks claim that they've called the council at large person, the council at large. I can't do anything because your council person won't do anything. My question is, when you envision or when you set it up for the 5 council at large, what was supposed to be their responsibilities in terms of the county government?
Mr. Warfield?
Yeah. The thought that we had when we set up those at-large ones was not a realistic thought, it turns out. We had in mind that each of the councilmanic district people were going to be terribly busy, which they are, with matters within that district. And we thought that these 5 persons, and in no way am I referring to individual personalities, I'm talking about the concept. The concept we had was wrong. It has not worked out, and I don't think would ever work out, that those 5 would end up thinking about policy and bigger issues and broader looks at the things we needed and didn't need. It was a mistake on our part.
Dewey, from the Metro Charter Revision Commission, would you accept that as a proposal?
Well, I would agree with Mr. Warfield that it's not worked the way that it was envisioned to work. The idea, the concept was for those 5 people not to be involved in the potholes and the zoning and the minor issues, but to look at the overall policy and what's in the best interest of the entire city, and to sometimes step in when a district councilman perhaps was looking at a very parochial issue, not at what was in the best interest of the city. And from my perspective, unfortunately, it has not worked. Now, I have been influenced by one of the former members of the Charter Commission, my father, who was very disappointed that the at-large positions did not work out the way it was envisioned. Not that there was anything bad or that they were not good people trying to do the best job they could, but the concept did not play out in reality.
The people have been good people, but the concept was not realistic. I agree with you.
Other questions?
I have a question, if I could, since I've got the microphone.
You do? Go ahead, do it.
You know, one of the things that you've really piqued my curiosity about is what happened in 1952 or 53 to cause the Constitution to be changed? We talk about what happened once it was permissible, but you know, and one of the questions I'm going to go back and ask my dad now is, why was the Constitution changed in the early 50s? What was the impetus to allow there to be a consolidated form of government?
Let me comment on that, because both, shortly after Metro was passed in 1962, before the month of July was over, a lawsuit was pending and a trial was held before a special chancellor as to whether this charter was constitutional. Now, the truth of the matter is that a special chancellor came here, Chancellor Glenn Woodley, appointed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And when the case was appealed and went to the Supreme Court, again, it was a special justice that heard that case at that level. But both of them, in opinions, commented upon some quotations from the delegation that was involved in the constitutional amendment. And the fact that the people who did that said, we are looking forward to a new day, we need a new structure, we need to solve some problems that won't be solved otherwise. And so I really believe that it was leadership, largely from within Nashville, that brought about the amendment to the Tennessee Constitution that made the consolidation of city and county governments possible. Now, I know this, Charlie and John have been talking about it with Francis, the at-large positions. Not long after I had finished serving my one term as vice mayor, my good friend Richard Dinkins drew me aside. Richard's a good lawyer, later to be a judge, in the same office with those who had been really fighting the battle, Avon Williams, for example. And he said, George, this at-large thing is not working. And unless we start electing some minority people to that at-large position, you can expect me and some others to file some lawsuits and contest the constitutionality of that part of the charter. Fortunately, it wasn't long after that the political atmosphere began to change in this community. And some well-designed leadership within the African-American community then came on to the at-large positions and then became vice mayors. And that helped solve that problem. And Richard Dinkins, by the time he had become a judge, no longer threatened me with organizing a campaign to fight that part of the charter.
Carolyn Tucker and Howard Gentry.
Right.
Mr. Barrett?
Thank you. Dewey, the answer to your question is there were RIPA bills. John will remember that when we were young, Charlie and George, there'd be a slate of 6 delegates to the legislature put in the field by Ben West and 6 by Beverly Briley, and whichever side won would start to work on the other, and then the legislature granted and could amend city charters at will. And if you got your enemy elected to the legislature, and the mayor did, he'd allowed to be dispossessed. So they just revoked that charter and issued a new one. That was the driving force behind what's called the Home Rule Amendment. The second observation is, while we're celebrating this, we ought not forget one man who really played a very significant and key role, and that was Clifford Allen. When Clifford ran for the state senate and beat Dutch Ullian, and the banner was for Dutch, the Tennessean was for Clifford, holding their nose, I might say. Right, John? Clifford made up his mind he was going to get even, so he introduced the bill that made the second charter commission possible, lobbied it through the legislature, and that's how we got the second vote.
Good point.
Well, I always appreciate George telling me when I held my nose.
Ed, Kendall.
It's coming right to you, Ed.
Here it comes.
What Francis didn't realize, I lived on Jefferson Street. I'm a year older than Francis, and I'd already organized a campaign to run for mayor over there in North Nashville. I didn't tell him that. But I was fortunate enough to become a member of the school board in 1985. I believe the elected school board began in 83. Is that correct, Dewey?
That's right.
82. Okay. Dewey was a chairman, a very capable chairman, I might say, a young man. I think he was about 31 years old then. So y'all do your arithmetic, you'll know how old he is now. But my question is, during the time that you were considering this, I know that was an appointed school board versus an elected school board. And of course, until 1971, when they had the Swan decision, and which really started crosstown busing, it probably wasn't as significant an issue as it relates to elected versus appointed. But was any discussion of that had during that period of time? And I know it wasn't the law then, of course it became the law later, but was there any discussion as to the benefits, detriments maybe of having an elected board versus an appointed board, and how do you feel about that now?
There was a great deal of discussion. I would say that was one of the two topics that we spent the most time on. That and the councilmanic size were the two big things. And there certainly were benefits and disadvantages to each of them. I personally still think we did the right thing at that time with an elected school board. I know it was popular with the voters. And one thing we had to keep in mind was that you had to have a charter where there were provisions that the population who are the voters are going to vote for. And that was one of the reasons for the elected school board.
Mr. Siegenthaler, what is it about this election, about our government altering itself through this process, that 50 years later still brings out such strong emotion in people?
You know, Francis, I don't know whether this is right on the mark as an answer, but as I look back on it and think about what the Charter Commission did, the one aspect of of what makes this difference as positive as it's been was the decision they made to have a nonpartisan government. If you look at politics today, partisan politics today, gridlock, when you think that we don't have a primary to get elected to the council, don't have a primary to get elected mayor, it's a nonpartisan government. It's not Democrat, it's not Republican, not Libertarian, not Independent. It is a nonpartisan government. And party politics plays no role in campaigns for election. I mean, it might in one individual district, or maybe some councilman at large may want to raise a flag. But in my judgment, it's not talked about very much, but the idea of a nonpartisan metropolitan government, in my view, looking back on it, somebody who has spent a lot of time being partisan in his life, I will have to tell you, I think, Charlie, your judgment, the judgment of your colleagues, has made one great difference in providing us with a government that is, in which partisanship is diffused largely.
But why are people still mad at one another about this election?
They're gonna, that's politics, and they're gonna be mad at each other. I mean, you can't look at what I put up on the board and not understand that.
And looking at some of those cartoons,
and
looking at some of those cartoons from the Banner and the Tennessean, today, do you look back on them as in your emeritus status as a journalist and say we went too far?
Well, I think that a cartoon inevitably, if it's going to be effective, goes too far.
Sure.
But I do think that in that election, we had decided in 1958, Solon Evans Jr. decided, and his brother Eamon embraced that, and that metropolitan government was the way to go. And beyond that, from our point of view, it just made more rational sense. And I'll just add one other thing. There was a model that merging departments of government made sense. Dr. John Lentz, the county health director, came to see Ben West and Beverly Briley. First time he talked to Lytton Hickman, who was Judge Briley's predecessor. And he said, look, we don't need 2 health departments. I'm handling the inoculation for most of the county. I'm working both city and county schools. I can do this if the 2 of you will give me the opportunity. And they did give him the opportunity. And so when it was not infrequent during that campaign, when people were tearing at each other, you had John Lentz to look at, who had brought together the health departments, made it work efficiently, effectively, economically, and looking back on it, I think, and he was an old man when he did it, I think he's one of the heroes of metropolitan government and one of the heroes of Nashville.
Yeah, I agree thoroughly, and he had tremendous political appeal at that time, and if he wanted to get something done, he usually got it done. As one of my friends said, either get with him or get out of his way.
Charlie, looking back on it today, recognizing that the amount of property in Nashville that was exempt from taxation because of our colleges, schools, churches, government, did Ben West have any options other than annexation?
Well, of course, he had the option of annexation, which I think he was smart and also doing the right thing. What he had tried to do with the first metro failed, and he was a man of action, and he said, I'm going to somehow try to solve these problems. So I think that what he did in the annexation, and as far as I'm concerned with the 10 for Ben tax, I think he was doing the right thing. It also helped us to get metropolitan government passed the second time.
No doubt about it. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, if it hadn't been for annexation, and if it hadn't been for 10 for Ben, if there hadn't been that negative undercurrent in politics, and Tom Little worked it full time with the alarm clock and with those land grabs. I mean, I think that enough people who were taken in were furious about it.
Yeah.
Enough people who were outside were frightened about Ben's coming after me next. And I don't think that it would have been quite possible. And George, you may disagree with this because you were running.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly, John. When I came back from the Army, I moved into a home in the Green Hills area, outside the city of Nashville. I was then annexed, so that by the time we got to the second vote, I was voting as part of the city vote. I voted as part of the county vote the first time. But then I looked back not only what was happening in Green Hills, where 42,000 square miles. 80,000 people were, 42 square miles and 80,000 people were involved. Then you turn the clock and look out in Donaldson. In the first vote, Donaldson voted 2-1 against Metro. In the second vote, fearing annexation, they voted 2-1 for Metro, and they were voting as part of the county vote. So there's no question about that.
And you know, just one other aspect. We have the chief of police here. Those cartoons about private fire and police departments, they're reality. Mm-hmm. It could be a photograph as well as a cartoon. If you lived in that area outside the city, mm-hmm. if your house was going to be protected from fire, you had to go to Raymond Cannon in Madison, Inglewood. If your house was going to be protected from burglary, you had to go to Leo Lucarini in Belle Meade. And you had to pay them to provide you with police and fire protection. Mm-hmm. And it happened in 4 separate parts of the county.
Let me add one thing that we had in the second campaign we didn't have in the first. Bob, I'm talking about the way the teachers that summer got out and canvassed.
I'm glad you brought it up. I wanted to, but I knew we were.
Well, the teachers got out on that second one, and we had a literal grassroots campaign, and they shook more hands and knocked on more doors.
And one reason was principals and teachers were taken in by annexation with no plan as to how to deal with their pensions and other matters of the public school system. That was a mistake that I think Mayor West made by not taking that into consideration, because it did produce a reaction from those folks, and they did take part. By the way, do you all remember a fellow named Jimmy Robertson?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Robertson took advantage of the political climate and came out and helped the League of Women Voters, the teachers, and others with little packets of things to go to the polls.
Right.
And later, I think he became a state senator. Is that right?
Another unsung hero. That's right.
Right.
Yeah. So I just thought I'd mention those things.
Good.
One of the things we are determined to do as we proceed down this route for the next year is to monthly have a session like this here at the Siegenthaler Center, which leads me to my next task, that is to observe that we are going to start them on time and end them on time, which we are going to do today. We are also going to end each of them with recognition for our host, Mr. John Siegenthaler, who has made this.
Well, I hope you'll come back. I hope you'll come back again and again and invite all your friends to come. We're going to be talking about, one day we're going to talk about, one program is going to be dedicated to what would have happened to the African American community.
What would have happened if I had become mayor? That program.
Another day we're going to talk, Bob Bogan, about education. Another day we're going to talk about police and fire chief, and we're going to talk about how it all functioned. I see my kinsman back there, who was city attorney, Jim Murphy, and we're going to talk about the law and how the law has worked to make Metro work better. And so I hope you'll come back, and I hope you'll be a part.
And I'll also point out that the wizard behind the curtain is Tam Gordon, mayor, who has kept this process on the straight and narrow. And so Senator Harper and Mayor Charlie, Mayor, everybody, thank you and good night.
Okay, good job.